Leslie, if I may call you that, by your first name. Most of this is going to be a discussion about your career, but it's the becoming that computer analyst that I'm interested in to start. So can I place you in your childhood? I'm going to choose the year 10 years old, just arbitrarily, but you can pick another year. But who are your parents? Where are you living?
Oh, my parents are, I guess they would be called Jewish immigrants, but they came when they were children, so spoke English with no accent. My mother was a housewife, but she had been a milliner before she got married.
Oh.
And what may be relevant is my father, although we worked in a dry cleaning establishment, he had studied to be a doctor in the sense of having taken a pre-med course in college, but since that was the Depression, he...
For economic reasons, he was unable to...
I presume there were economic reasons, but that probably influenced me in the sense of he may have been responsible for my being interested in science, or that may have been just innate. I have no idea.
I think you would have more of a certain sense of that if he had pushed you in a way towards science. And I'm getting a sense that that wasn't happening.
Not to my memory. If they pushed me to anything, it might have been slightly to wanting to be a doctor.
Yes.
But that was just in the sense that at some point I decided I wanted a microscope because I had looked through a neighbor's microscope. And they were supportive and let me buy one with money from bar mitzvah gifts. And I think the reason was they had hopes that would lead me into wanting to become a doctor, but they never actually
but not,
said anything.
It wasn't in the air, this is what we want from you.
No.
Are you an only child?
No, I had an older brother.
And was he perhaps influential? You know, without pushing too hard, I'm just wondering about intellectual influences or whatever. They may not have been strong or apparent. What was he like?
He was probably my exact opposite. He had artistic ability and became a commercial artist and did some really lovely stuff. And I am totally incapable of drawing anything.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I think he would have been terrible. Well, he probably was terrible in mathematics and in foreign languages, and I was good in those. So,
when were you beginning to notice? Again, a child lives his life, doesn't necessarily judge it along the way, but when are you beginning to find your aptitudes? In school, is there a good program? I mean, you're in New York City where the teaching might have been very good, but you can tell me about that too. What is the environment outside the home that is shaping you or leading you to recognize what you're good at?
Well, I'm not sure that I recognized it, but other people did. I was clearly, one of the best or the best student in my classes in
from early
elementary school. Yes.
Yes.
And in junior high school, I went into a program of doing 3 years and 2.
Already.
Yes. And I learned much later in life that my parents were approached by, I think, with the opportunity of enrolling me in a special course at Columbia University for gifted children. And that would have been while I was still in elementary school.
Really?
And my mother didn't want me to do it because she wanted me to have a more normal childhood.
Right.
And
so you didn't do it?
Right, I didn't even know about it.
Right.
So,
This is the opposite of pushing you in one direction.
yes.
She wanted a happy childhood for you, and that wasn't going to be part of it in her.
I presume, again, this is something I knew nothing about
This
at
is
the time.
assuming what she's thinking. But that being said, in junior high, even before you've been marked or recognized as able, certainly able particularly in science and mathematics or in general? Are you a good student in most subjects except drawing?
Well, I think I would be getting A's or whatever the grades were given in elementary school. I don't remember in all the subjects. I remember I had an uncle who taught history. And I remember asking him, what's the point of history?
I hope you got an answer.
I probably did. I don't remember what it was. So it was clear that in some sense, my interests were not in the humanities, but more in the sciences.
Right. Now, I'm looking for, he or she may not exist, a particularly significant teacher, maybe in junior high, maybe by the time you're in high school. And I know you go to Bronx Science, so you're already, people are noticing that you're good at this, and you're going to an excellent high school. Somebody is encouraging you. Yeah. Somebody is saying, go to Bronx Science. What is happening?
Oh, well, first of all, at Bronx Science, I was not, I don't think, an outstanding genius in the sense that there were two students who, I'm not sure if they were better at math than I was, but there was the math team, and they were certainly much better than I at that. But math team is measuring not just intelligence, but quickness.
Yes, response time.
And I've never been that quick on my feet. And my recollection is at Bronx Science and overall ranking, I was something like in the 20s, which is, pretty good at Bronx Science.
Yes, but
several hundred people in the class, but
nevertheless not a star, so to speak. Again, I'm still searching for that teacher, even though you may not be a star or on the math team or the best on it. Who's noticing you? Because and maybe only you developing your own intellectual curiosity.
I actually do not remember having mentors.
Okay.
In school at any point. And I can remember, one of my memories is of a teacher who was clearly not fit to be my mentor and wasn't, that it was in elementary algebra, and we were studying factoring quadratic equations. Mm-hmm. And I asked him, how do you know there's only one way to factor an algebraic equation? Now, if a child asks that, it was just such a doorway to teaching them about prime numbers and unique factorization and stuff. But all he did was say, well, that's just the way it is.
Oh, the worst kind of thing for a teacher to do.
So, but again, the one teacher I've had, a formal teacher, that is, who I remember as having really taught me something, was in graduate school. It was Professor Richard Dick Palais.
Yes, it's important to say the name, yes.
Who later became my de jure thesis advisor.
Yeah.
And we've become friends since then. Mm-hmm. And, well, actually, let me explain what he taught me by going back to I forget whether it was junior high or high school, but when people learn geometry, or when people are taught geometry, they're taught that they're really learning to do rigorous reasoning, and everything is really precise and rigorous. And when I was, again, either in high school or junior high school, I came across the proof, quote, proof, that all triangles are isosceles. Have you heard that?
Yes.
You're aware of that, okay.
Absolutely.
People who aren't aware of it should look it up on the web. And the fallacy in the proof is that it comes because we depend on the pictures that we draw in the ordinary plane geometry proofs.
Yes.
And proof by picture is not rigorous. And that proof of that all triangles are isosceles is the clear demonstration of that. So that led me to an interest or a predilection for algebra, both, elementary and I guess it was called advanced algebra in high school, and algebra, group theory, stuff like that in college, because I knew that every proof in algebra, or at least in things like group theory, could be made completely precise and everything reduced to axioms. And I really liked that.
Yes.
And what Dick Palais showed me was that everything in analysis is the generalization of calculus. And he showed that could be done completely rigorously. And knowing that could be done completely rigorously made me realize that all of mathematics could be done completely rigorously. And that has enormously influenced my career.
Wonderful. I'm going to dial back just a bit in time to the graduation period from high school, not the graduation, but the decision about the next step and where to go. Are you already in your mind a mathematician by the time you're finished Bronx Science?
Well, actually, when I was in high school, I had sort of assumed that I would become an engineer because that's what people did, to make money.
Right.
And I remember at some point, when I mentioned that to a classmate, he said to me, "You're too bright to be an engineer." And I thought about it and said, oh. So then I decided that I would become a physicist. And so when I went to MIT, it was with the intent of becoming a physics major.
Physics major, yes.
And I'm not sure why. I can't remember how I slid from physics into mathematics. I remember...
Or ascended, depending on your perspective.
Interesting that I
but
talked about
it happened.
that direction.
It happened. And early enough for you to then focus on mathematics at MIT, or was that going to be later? Were you essentially studying physics at your whole time at MIT?
Well, I think the situation was that I was taking required physics courses, but I would be taking math electives. I mean, that's my recollection, and I'm not sure how many electives there were.
Yes.
But, well, I guess also that, I guess I was taking math courses that a physics major would not normally take.
Yes.
But that was partly because since I had taken an advanced placement exam, got me out of elementary calculus, that gave me at least one extra elective that I was able to do, taking math. And the thing that actually switched me from a physics major to a math major,
Right.
is that in those days, physics majors had to write an undergraduate thesis and math majors didn't.
Of such circumstances, many life decisions are made. So
But by the time I graduated from MIT, it was clear that I wanted to be a mathematician, which meant becoming a math professor.
why didn't you stay at MIT for the next stage? Did you search the world for the right kind of department? How calculating, so to speak, it's a pun, but how calculating were you about the next step and which graduate program to enter?
Well, I entered Brandeis probably for two reasons. First, I was told that it had a bright young math faculty. Also, there was no problem getting in, but because it wasn't in the top tier university.
Yes.
On the other hand, I think that the only university that, well, the only university I didn't get into, and probably the only major one that I wouldn't have gotten into was Princeton, is they had a very, they were very selective in.
And you weren't yet a star?
Well, my grades weren't that good, but that was mostly personal reasons and not involving math or
Yes.
courses, but humanities courses. And the other reason for choosing Brandeis is that I felt that there would be less pressure there, and it was a time in my life that I thought I would. I was getting somewhat doubtful about mathematics, and so I felt that that would be a better place for me, and in fact, it was.
So you got in, as you did most places. You went to Brandeis. At what point, I mean, a graduate student has to be more directed than an undergraduate joining a school. So what are you deciding? Which direction in mathematics, or what is being decided with a mentor or professor?
Well, the first couple of years, there was pretty much a set curriculum. And afterwards, I went through a period which I didn't know what I wanted to do. And Brandeis was very good about just letting me drift and still keeping me on as a student with the fellowship. I realized afterwards that, of course, they must have realized that I was really smart.
Yeah.
So one thing is that I didn't realize until quite recently how smart I was.
Yeah, that's important.
And actually there's a paper that hints at that. I don't know if you're aware of it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. A couple of psychologists wrote a paper that purported to show that people who aren't good at something think they're better than they are.
But people who know...
My translation of that is that, excuse me, stupid people think they're smart because they're too stupid to know that they're not.
Yes, yes.
But they also suggested, didn't do any experiments about, that there might be a different effect, that people who are very good at something don't realize how good they are because they think everybody finds it that easy. And that was the case, definitely the case with me. It was not that I thought that I was unusually smart.
Right.
It was that I would be really puzzled by how other people had so much trouble understanding some things.
Got it, got it. My version of what you just said, it may not be the exact point, but it supports it, is the famous statement or assumption that people have, which is that if you're really smart, you know what you don't know. And that would lead to, again, a kind of uncertainty. But in any case, you were not yet aware of what your capabilities were. Is that a way to say it?
Well, I think I was aware of my capabilities. I would think it would be more accurate to say that I wasn't aware that other people didn't have those capabilities.
Got it. Got it. Now, in a professional level of study, you have to do a thesis. You can't get out of the thesis now. You're in graduate school. Who is directing you? How are you choosing?
Okay. Well, a little bit more background.
Please.
At some point, I left Brandeis and went off to teach math for 4 years at a small college in Vermont, Marlborough College. I'm supposed to give names. And at about that time, I thought that I wanted to do physics. And basically what I did is I think I was encouraged by somebody, I don't remember who. Mm-hmm. I would walk into a physics professor's office and say, what should I read? I want to learn this. And they were very, very polite and very helpful. And so I did some of that. And when I went back to Brandeis, it was with an intention of writing a thesis in mathematical physics.
Okay.
And I came across a problem, or I somewhere read about something that wasn't known, and I thought, that's an interesting problem, and I'll try to do something about it. And there was nobody at Brandeis who was a who was a specialist in the area that was required, and it required partial differential equations. And so by some mechanism that I don't remember, I was put in touch with a professor at MIT, and I have to admit that my failing memory is not sure, but I think it was Professor Kotake. I would have to look at my thesis to make sure. But I started working with him, and it quickly became apparent that the idea that I had wasn't going to pan out. But he had a problem in his back pocket and suggested I work on it. And I did, and came up with a thesis. And I came up with some result in partial differential equations. And I think it was probably a quite minor result. Well, I'm sure it was certainly not earth-shaking, and I suspect it was quite minor, but sufficient for a thesis. And so I wrote my thesis in partial differential equations.
So all your future work and direction is not really the result of the problem you looked at thesis.
Right, and in fact, I know absolutely nothing about partial differential equations except what was in my thesis.
Really, very interesting. So many others really built on that. Okay, you got your PhD.
Yeah, but now I should then rewind.
Yes, please.
And go back to my high school days.
Yes.
And when I was probably a junior in high school, possibly a senior, but I got interested in computers. I read a book on, what was it about? It involved Boolean logic, and I think also circuits. So basically elementary digital circuits. And so I got interested in computers from that end, and even with a friend built a little 4-bit counter, I think it was. And I remember and those were the days with vacuum tubes, and it was built with vacuum tubes that I got from IBM, because for some reason or how I did it, I no longer remember, but I walked into IBM, probably they had a showroom in downtown Manhattan, with computers that, in big glass windows open to the street. And so I walked in there, and in those days they they wouldn't wait for tubes to burn out. They would just replace all the tubes in the computer on some schedule. And
So they were available.
right, and so I got those tubes that that were still good but no longer being used, and that's what I built that 4-bit
They were probably
counter
charmed
on.
by this young fellow walking in and asking for them. So how good was
Okay,
it?
so I mean that was just a little digital circuit,
Right.
of no interest, but it did get me started interested in computers. And when I graduated, through some program of one by New York City, I wound up getting a summer job at Con Edison, the electric utility in New York. And they put me in some office that was doing something totally boring. But they had a computer, and I managed to get myself transferred to the computer department, where I was running tapes. That is, in those days, you ran a program. You would first need to mount magnetic tapes that were used for input or output, and then you would load the punch cards in a hopper and run the program. And so, that was my job. But in my spare time and in the computer's spare time, and in those days when people went out to lunch, the computer was sitting idle. And so in its spare time, I learned to program that computer. And then and it was clear to the people around there, how smart I was.
Yes.
And so the next, I forget, it was 2 or 3 summers, I worked as a programmer in the summer at Con Edison.
So college, and in the summer you worked as a programmer.
Right, and it never occurred to me that, there was
A career in it.
Well, it was clear that there would be a career in programming, but there was no such thing as computer science in those days.
Yes.
It never even occurred to me that computers would be a subject of academic interest.
Right.
But when I went back to Brandeis after teaching in Marlborough,
right.
oh, I should say that. And also, while I was at Brandeis, I guess maybe I was wrong to say that they kept supporting me with fellowships. I think that for a couple of years, they didn't support me with the fellowship, but I got a part-time job working at the Viter Corporation.
Uh-huh.
And there was initially programming, but it was programming on a new computer that was being built. And I started doing what these days would be considered, system building, or which is considered a computer science discipline.
Right.
Although to me it was just programming.
Right.
And then when I came back to go to Brandeis
Yeah,
from
to finish
Vermont,
the degree.
I also supported myself by working part-time, this time at Massachusetts Computer Associates, or Compass as it was called. And in the course of that, Compass was a company that their main source of income was building Fortran compilers. But they also did some, what I guess was what's called research at the time, for ARPA, now later DARPA, the Defense Army Research Program Association, the people who started the internet. And in fact, we're starting the internet at that time, although I didn't know it. And in the course of that, at some point, I did some work which was actually, would be called research, and produced. Did I produce a publishable paper? At which point I first published a paper on that. But at any rate, I did some work for them, which was actually connected to a Fortran compiler about executing instructions in parallel.
Yes.
And what I did was, it seemed pretty trivial, but it was basically a simple application of linear algebra. But since the people working there knew nothing about linear algebra, it seemed miraculous to them. And so at some point, well, after I got my degree,
Yes.
I had always assumed that I would go and become a professor, in this case, a math professor, since that was what
you were trained for. Yes.
Yeah, although I'm not sure whether I thought that computing would be of interest. Yeah, I thought there might be a relationship between mathematics and computing, because I had discovered something which had been discovered already about, something, yes, it was actually some property of differential equations that made a certain way of doing the computation more efficient than another.
Right.
And so I didn't have any clear idea of what kind of math I would do. But at any rate, I had an offer from University of Colorado to teach math. And at that, just as I was, right about to accept it, excuse me.
Of course.
Compass said, we're going to start an office in the Bay Area. How would you like to work in our office in the Bay Area, doing computer stuff?
Yeah.
And because it was Colorado Springs rather than, aphasia sets in, the town where Boulder. Because it was Colorado Springs rather than the Boulder, I decided to go to the Bay Area. Excuse me.
Of course.
Well, almost, about, a few weeks after I had, said no to Colorado, Compass decided that, they were not ready to open their California office, but why don't I go ahead and out in California and work by myself until they come out there?
You really made that decision. This is such academic heresy to turn down a position at the university and go to what isn't even a job in the end yet. And
well, no, it was a job.
No, but you said they then pulled the plug, so to speak.
Well, obviously they would have let me, be happy to have me work for them in Boston.
Yes.
But they said that since, I probably knew that, that it was the Bay Area that was an attraction for me. They said, okay, we'll let you go out there and work by yourself until we open the office. And the reason they were willing to do that is that...
Yes, I want to know.
That work I told you I did about parallelizing things based on linear algebra.
Right.
I had actually convinced them to let me spend a month, I forget whether it was 1 month or two, probably 1 month, in New Mexico at a friend's place and work on it there. And since I had done that and actually worked and came back with something useful,
yes.
They had enough confidence that they figured I could work by myself. Well, the upshot was that they never did open that office in California. But for, let's see, from 72 to 77, I was their California branch, and I would...
And you were supported by the company.
Yeah,
but you were working by yourself.
Yes, and it pretty much turned out to be on whatever what I felt like.
Extraordinary.
Yes, and it was paid for by research grants from the government.
But it's still taking a chance and giving you free reign. It's like a dream. It's like a research institute way before one got these positions.
Well, except it was being myself, and
Yes.
That's not a great way to be, especially in a starting researcher. But I did make some connections with people in the Bay Area
At not a bad time.
at Stanford,
Yes.
and
Berkeley
also
too, or Stanford principally?
probably Berkeley, and at Xerox PARC. I don't remember the. Well, okay, let me continue that. In 1977, the Compass decided, or some bean counter at Compass or something decided that, they couldn't cope with me working in the West Coast, and so I had to move to the East Coast, and so I left Compass and started working at SRI.
It's a big question, maybe too big, but what is the general state of computational thinking at this point, or analysis? What do we know in the world at the point when you are gravitating more and more to computer analysis? Is it, as you look back, a very fecund period, questions in the air, ambitions for the field? Any broad sense of that?
Well, I can read the history books as well as you can
Yeah.
to say what was going on.
But in
it
your
was,
head.
Well, it's a question of what I was aware of.
What were you aware of?
And I guess I was aware of some things even while I was working at Compass. I remember I got a paper that was written by a couple of guys at BBN, which led to my time clocks paper, which is the paper that
Yeah.
I'm most known for.
No question.
And what I don't remember is how much of my contact with other people in the Bay Area was when I was working at Compass, and how much was after I started at SRI. Because after I started at SRI, I was plugged into a community.
Exactly.
We had contracts to work on and all of that stuff, and I was not completely free to work on what I wanted.
Right.
But
Was that paper the Dijkstra? I'm probably mispronouncing that. What was the paper you said that started you in the path of thinking that led to the time clock?
No, it was a paper by two people, Paul Johnson and Bob Thomas at
okay.
BBN.
Okay.
And, hardly anybody has heard of them now.
But it led to quite an interesting series of thoughts in your case. So what was the paper approaching, or what was the problem it was suggesting, or what?
Well, okay, the problem they were thinking about
Yes.
is in the database world, I presume people know what a database is,
Right.
something that holds people's data. And they were probably one of the first people to, if not the first people, to think about distributed databases, namely where you had copies of the data were kept in multiple locations.
Yes.
And what they were looking at is the problem of synchronizing those different copies of the data. And they had an algorithm that did it, and I realized that their algorithm wasn't quite right, not in the sense that it was formally incorrect, but that it was lacking, it had the property, or the lack of property, that two different operations that should have appeared and have been done in one order wound up being done in the reverse order. And I was able to correct their algorithm so that that didn't happen. And also, even more importantly, is I realized that that solution was not just for distributed databases, but could provide a solution for an arbitrary distributed system.
Yes, I understand.
So that's one of the that's the type of problem that was going around. And yeah, I think it was in 1976 oh God, no, I don't remember if it was 76 or 77, that I attended a workshop at, it's not a Silomar, oh, where was it? At any rate, the IEEE had a Lake Arrowhead, I think it was, an annual workshop. And there I met, I remember Jim Gray giving a talk about a particular problem involving distributed systems. And I'm not sure if that was when I met Jim Gray or if I'd already known Jim Gray from the Bay Area. But so that's the sort of problem. And also the stuff that was going on at Xerox PARC, which is, people aren't aware, they invented, the Macintosh and the whole idea of personal computing, and also not just personal computing, but personal distributed computing.
Right, which is the focus of your interest.
So, and in fact, it's the little footnote that at the time when Compass was letting me go, I applied both. Well, I applied to Berkeley. Well, I talked to Berkeley, Stanford, Xerox PARC, and SRI. And when I first talked to Stanford, they didn't seem to be interested in me. People at Berkeley were quite interested in me, but I was not really seriously applying, and because I really preferred working in industry.
Can we talk about that for a moment? Because this decision, particularly in computer analysis, of whether one chooses to work in industry or academia or both, is a quite important one. What is the difference in the circumstance of the researcher?
I'm not going to say anything. I can't say anything in general.
Okay,
what I can say for me is that at that point, I still didn't really consider computers an academic discipline. And so I couldn't imagine, to me it would mean, my image of it was teaching programming.
Right, and that you didn't want to do.
I didn't even, it just didn't seem appropriate that programming is something that, should be taught at a university any more than, any manual trade.
Right, right, understood.
So that was the main reason why I wasn't seriously considering Berkeley. Perhaps if I had, I don't know if I can't say whether there's anything they could have done that would have convinced me that, computer science was a real academic discipline. No, it was just something, that was in my head. But at any rate, the interesting part is that Xerox PARC didn't make me an offer.
Right.
And was it 8 years later, I wound up working at DEC CERC, the System Research Center of Digital Equipment Corporation, which is basically the refugees from Xerox PARC who had moved there. And when I asked them about why they didn't make me an offer, the official reason was that they thought that they would be able to get the benefit of my results by reading my papers, and they didn't have to hire me. And I never believed that. And I think there was a feeling probably that I just wouldn't fit into the Xerox PARC culture.
Which may have been a good thing for both sides. You certainly found a happy situation to be in.
Yeah. On the other hand, maybe the world would be using LaTeX rather than Word had I been at Xerox PARC, and I would be flying my own 737 and flying on the space station.
Wonderful. Because we don't have so much time, I'm going to press what I would normally do, which is ask for what I would call eureka moments. Now, the first eureka moment I would ask for, and it probably wasn't a moment, it's a process, was...
Weaker moment?
No, eureka.
Eureka,
Eureka moment. So at what point do you figure out, and I understand there wasn't just one point, that computer the inquiry into the computation was not just a programmer's universe, but one with a rich analytical possibility. Because you certainly...
there was no eureka moment.
There was no eureka moment.
It just, it came gradually, and at some point, I just sort of said to myself, oh, I'm a computer scientist.
Okay, that's an answer.
I can't even remember when that moment was, but it wasn't, I didn't think of it as a eureka moment. It's just, oh, so that's what I've been doing.
It's the right answer. I mean, it's how you thought of it. The other thing I want to ask before we really get to the time clock moment, again, not a moment, but a process of maybe eureka, maybe not, is the broader question. Again, I'll ask it. It may be interesting or not. And that is just this difference, if there is one, or borderline or blending of the computer analysis world and the world of so-called pure mathematics. It's often discussed. People often say, I am this, not that. How do you think about that link between mathematical inquiry and computer analysis?
I think the best answer, but not a very satisfactory one, is that I don't, in the sense that I don't think about philosophical questions like that.
Understood.
And as a matter of fact, I regard one of the secrets of my success has been not thinking of grand philosophical questions, but in looking at little interesting problems.
Okay. Very interesting, actually. So there you are, not thinking about mathematics and the future of computer science, but doing the work. Tell me a little bit about the work that led you to the time clock.
Well, actually, I would rather not talk about that at this point, because take up that something, it was not a question you asked, but a question I would sort of like to answer.
Please.
In the sense of the relationship, like between mathematics and programming.
Yes.
And something that I realized something that because of my background in mathematics, I would do naturally, which is to approach a problem. For example, the synchronization of two databases.
Right.
Not as a programming problem, but either a mathematical problem or a physics problem. But they're not separated, because we know in physics the way you should think about a physics problem is in terms of mathematics.
Yes.
Now, physics is not a branch of mathematics. Because the difference between mathematics and physics is that mathematics provides a model of the real world.
Yes.
It is not the real world. And the difference between a physicist and a mathematician is that a mathematician can look at models that he just thinks are interesting, at least a pure mathematician. Whereas a physicist needs to find a model that accurately describes what he's looking at.
Exactly.
And there is no single mathematical model of any real world system. I mean, models are created, for a purpose. So, for example, when you study celestial mechanics, or usually you consider a planet a point mass. And that works fine for predicting, the orbits of the planets, and if you want to where to point your telescope at a certain time to see one. Right. On the other hand, it's not a very useful model if you want to talk about the weather on a planet.
Right.
And what I've been doing all my life, but becoming in some sense more aware and trying to make it more precise and formalize it, is thinking about programming problems, not in terms of code, in terms of programming, but in terms of mathematics.
Yes.
And that, well, for example, what I've realized, and amazingly few people seem to, is that an algorithm is not a program. An algorithm is a higher level abstraction. It's that can then be implemented with lots of different programs.
Right.
And what I've discovered is that the best way to think about algorithms and to describe algorithms is in terms of mathematics, not in terms of programming language concepts.
I understand.
And well, I've developed a language called TLA+,
Yes.
which is basically to allow engineers to write mathematical descriptions of the algorithms that they're writing. Now, but by algorithms, I also not necessarily the algorithms that you will find in a textbook, but a high-level system design is in a sense an algorithm because it's an abstract description of a lower-level program. Systems designs differ from the algorithms that you see in textbooks because they're very specific and they're not useful for much other than the particular system they're describing, but it's the same thing, and therefore you should think about them in mathematics. So TLA Plus is a language that allows them to both think about their higher level designs in mathematics, but also apply tools to check them at that higher level. Now, that was the end of a thread that was coming from someplace, and I forget where it was coming from. But it's okay. So, and what I've realized, and what I've observed, is that thinking about algorithms or high-level designs of systems in programming languages rots your mind, to say it impolitely. It constrains your thinking. And that learning to think in terms of mathematics rather than in terms of programming language concepts improves your thinking and improves your system designs.
Yes.
And I will quote, one thing that I learned, won't go into details, one case where people were designing an operating system for something that had designed an operating system for something that flew on a spacecraft, and they were redesigning it. And for reasons that I'm not completely certain, they decided they wanted to write a high-level specification of the new version before they implemented it, something that's seldom done.
Yes.
And they decided to write it in TLA+. And the end result was that their second version of the system, now when you build second versions, you know that they expand, they grow. Well, the second version of the system had 1/10 the code of the original system that had been flown, and the original system was flown on a spacecraft, so they were not, profligate with, with code.
Right, of course.
And they credit that to having written their high-level design. And they say in TLA+, but I would say it's because they were thinking mathematically.
Wonderful. We're close to the end, but I'm going to ask another version because it's another period. At the moment now, what are the interesting problems, issues that you're addressing or you think the field is addressing that may result from some of your insights? There may be a lot, there may be nothing that you want to talk about, but here's the opportunity.
Well, first of all, these days I do very little thinking about problems. in the sense that, I do very little research. Occasionally I come out with little pieces of things that are interesting that I would, consider worth publishing a paper, and
Yes.
they will usually appear on my publications page on the web because I don't want to go through the hassle of, putting them in print somewhere in a
Right.
journal that won't be seen by as many people as who go to my website.
Right.
But my primary occupation is trying to get people to think mathematically about programming. But that's not the question you asked. The question you want to know about the problems that other people are thinking about.
Yes, that you are noticing or interested in.
And well, what clearly these days is the big problem that everybody is interested in is AI.
Yeah.
And what I see as as a major problem is that, well, AI solves problems that people were never able to solve because they didn't understand how to solve them. And what AI does is gets around that problem by basically writing programs that we don't understand.
Right.
Now, you can't reason mathematically. You can't understand, reason about something if you don't understand it.
Yes.
So, for example, we would like to be able to gain, to be able to write some mathematical model that will allow us to prove a theorem which can be interpreted as saying that this automobile is not going to run down a child.
Right.
But we can't do that
Yes.
because we don't understand the program that's driving that car.
Yes.
And that's worrying me. Well, there's the obvious problem for people designing, building cars. But I see a more generic problem there. Most of the work people do, well, when I say you should think mathematically about something, and I say you should, write a mathematical specification before you start, well, I say you should, and I always say that you should write a description of what a program is going to do before you write the program. Because it's only when you write something do you know if you really understand what you're talking about.
No question.
But for most of the programs that people write, that specification is really simple. It takes this piece of data and moves it over there and does this to it.
Right.
And it's a very small fraction of the programs that get written that require a real mathematical specification, for example, one written in TLA+. Now, with that large amount of dull programming,
Yes.
I think it's inevitable that it's not going to be done by people any longer. It's going to be done by programs. And there are two ways that might happen. One is we will develop better techniques for going from a precise description of something to the code.
Yes.
And the other possibility is that we will build AI programs that allow people, and that requires that people be able to write precise descriptions, even of those trivial things that
Yes.
they're doing.
Yes.
And the second approach is going to use AI to take imprecise specifications that people write
Yes.
and produce code from them.
Yes.
And then we're going to be in this situation that we're going to be writing programs that we'd have no idea what they do.
We don't. Yes.
And that's a scary prospect. I mean, I understand that driving a car, we cannot write a mathematical model for it, and we're going to have to live with that. But I would hate to be in a world in which I don't know what my bank is going to do something because the bank has no idea what their programs are doing.
Yes. And that seems to be the world we're approaching.
And the only way, I think, to avoid it
yes.
is to get people to be able to specify things precisely.
Yes.
And that is not being taught anywhere, basically.
Yes.
People say that they should be teaching programming in junior high school or something. I think that's a great idea. But people are not teaching programming in junior high school. They're teaching coding. And coding, the actual writing of code, should be the trivial part of programming.
Yes.
The hard part of programming should be understanding, having this mathematical model of what it is that your program is supposed to do. And that's not being taught. And that's what needs to be taught. And that's because people in academia have to understand that programming is more than just coding. And they don't. The people who are teaching programming don't understand the difference between programming and coding.
That is a wonderful last word. Thank you very much.
Thank you.